In every modern American military operation, the most dangerous moment is not when shots are fired, but when Washington decides that all other options have run out. There is no declaration of war, no speech before Congress, no flashing cameras. There are only sealed rooms, satellite maps spread across tables, access routes circled in red, and one name repeated again and again, with the same cold conclusion: the target is isolated enough to act. Venezuela at this stage was not a country in full-scale war, but it was no longer a stable space either. Its armed forces were fragmented command chains shaped more by politics than professionalism, and most dangerously, loyalty flowed toward individuals rather than institutions. That is not an environment for an invasion. It is, however, an ideal environment for a controlled capture operation. Titan Navy looks at situations like this without moral framing or political debate. We look at them through the only question the Pentagon asks: first, can the opposing system detect, respond, and coordinate in time? If the answer is no, the game is over before it begins. In the months leading up to the operation, U.S. military activity across the Caribbean quietly increased, but never enough to trigger alarms. A naval task group adjusted its routing under the cover of rotational training. Surveillance aircraft flew a little higher, a little farther still, well within what could be labeled routine. To the media, these were footnotes. To military planners, they were pieces being placed exactly where they needed to be. The critical factor in any leadership capture operation is not striking the target, but severing the system around the target. There is no need to defeat the entire Venezuelan military. It is enough to ensure that for a few decisive hours, no unit can coordinate fast enough, no radar can reliably separate noise from signal, and no commander is willing to issue independent orders when communications are compromised. The United States does not need chaos. It needs control of tempo. That is the fundamental difference between modern American military power and the outdated image many still have of warfare. When you control the timing, you control the outcome. In every realistic scenario, approaching a figure like Maduro never begins with special operations forces. It begins with data. Movement schedules, daily routines, guard rotations, and the reliability of air defense units around the capital. Not to strike everything, but to find the gap, where no one holds full responsibility. That gap always exists, especially in systems where personal loyalty matters more than organizational competence. When the moment arrives, U.S. forces do not appear in mass. There are no amphibious landings, no fighter jets roaring over Caracas. Instead, control platforms move first. The electromagnetic environment shifts before a single soldier touches the ground. Communications become unreliable. Security units receive orders but cannot confirm their origin. And in any military force, uncertainty is the most corrosive weapon of all. What many fail to understand is that the United States does not need numerical superiority to control a situation. It only needs to ensure the opponent cannot act in sync. An elite unit cut off is not a threat. A loyal guard force without clear direction will choose to stand still. And standing still in an operation like this is failure. Titan Navy has said this before. American military strength is not defined by its weapons inventory, but by its ability to turn a potential battlefield into a space locked by time and options. When every response path is narrowed, the target stops being a head of state. He becomes an isolated individual inside a system collapsing layer by layer. By the time most people imagine a capture operation beginning, it is already over. The helicopters, the operators, the dramatic moment of physical contact. Those are the final seconds of a process that has usually taken months. The United States does not improvise at this level. It constructs an environment where improvisation by the opponent becomes impossible. In a real-world scenario involving a foreign head of state, especially one protected by layered security and embedded inside a sovereign capital, the United States does not think in terms of attack. It thinks in terms of enclosure. The battle space is not Caracas itself. The battle space is everything that allows Caracas to function as a protected space, airspace, communications decision, authority response timing, and the psychology of commanders who know they are outmatched but do not know how or when. The first layer is maritime control because geography never lies. Venezuela's northern coast faces open water, and open water belongs to the U.S. Navy by default. This does not require blockades or aggressive maneuvers. A carrier strike group does not need to announce its presence. Its aircraft do not need to fly combat sorties. The mere existence of U.S. naval aviation within operational range reshapes the decision-making of every regional military planner. No Venezuelan radar operator needs to see an American aircraft to know it could already be there. This is where Titan Navy perspective matters. Control is not exerted by visible force. It is exerted by denying the opponent confidence. If you do not know whether the sky is already compromised, you hesitate. And hesitation kills coordination. Parallel to maritime positioning, airborne intelligence assets quietly expand their coverage. Long-endurance ISR platforms flying legal routes begin mapping electromagnetic behavior rather than just physical terrain. Who transmits when they transmit, how often they change frequencies, which nodes relay orders, which commanders rely on personal phones rather than hardened military networks. These details matter more than tank counts or troop numbers. A modern military collapses not when it loses firepower, but when it loses coherence. At this stage, nothing is hostile. Nothing violates international law. That is intentional. The United States does not want escalation. It wants predictability. Predictability allows planners to simulate reactions, stress test timelines, and identify which Venezuelan units will freeze rather than fight when uncertainty spikes. The second layer is regional air dominance without occupation. U.S. Air Force assets do not need to overfly Venezuelan territory to dominate it. High-altitude platforms, standoff electronic warfare aircraft, and space-based systems work together to create what is essentially a reversible switch. At any chosen moment, radar clarity can degrade. Navigation accuracy can become questionable. Secure channels can suffer delays measured not in hours, but in seconds. Seconds are enough. This is where many outside observers misunderstand American doctrine. They imagine electronic warfare as a blunt instrument. It is not. It is surgical. It is applied selectively, geographically, and temporally. You do not blind the entire country. You blind the units that matter at the moment. They matter long enough for indecision to spread. Meanwhile, the human terrain is being shaped. Not through propaganda broadcasts or public threats, but through silence. Venezuelan commanders notice that routine communications with certain external partners suddenly feel less responsive. Maintenance supplies arrive late. Spare parts are delayed. None of this is dramatic enough to trigger alarms, but together they create a sense that the system is already strained. By the time the operation enters its active phase, many local commanders are already psychologically defensive. They are not thinking about how to fight the United States. They are thinking about how to avoid being blamed when something goes wrong. That mindset is critical. The third layer is special operations positioning, and this is where realism matters most. Contrary to popular imagination, U.S. Special Operations Forces do not storm capitals from the outside. They are already nearby, already embedded in the region under various legitimate frameworks. Training missions, advisory roles, intelligence exchanges. The United States has spent decades building this access. It does not appear suddenly in a crisis. It is already there when the crisis arrives. These forces do not move toward the target immediately. They wait. They monitor. They rehearse contingencies not for combat, but for control. How to secure a location without firefights. How to isolate a structure without triggering alarms. How to exploit the hesitation of guards who are waiting for confirmation that will never come. The fourth layer is legal framing, and Titan Navy does not ignore this because the Pentagon does not ignore it. Every action is paired with a justification prepared in advance. Counter-narcotics operations, protection of U.S. personnel, imminent threat assessments. Whether one agrees with these arguments is irrelevant. What matters is that they exist, are internally consistent, and are ready to be deployed the moment the operation becomes visible. This matters because visibility is inevitable. The United States does not seek secrecy forever. It seeks delayed clarity. The longer it takes the international community to understand what has happened, the less time there is to respond in any meaningful way. Inside Venezuela, this delay is even more powerful. When something extraordinary happens, and no immediate explanation follows, rumor spreads faster than orders. Units wait. Guards hesitate. Commanders choose inaction because action without confirmation is career suicide. At this point, the target is no longer protected by strength. He is protected by inertia, and inertia is fragile. The actual moment of execution, when it comes, is almost anticlimactic. No massed formations, no prolonged firefights. The United States does not need to defeat Venezuelan forces. It only needs them to remain fragmented for a narrow window. The difference between a successful capture and a catastrophic escalation is measured in minutes. From a Titan Navy standpoint, this is where American military culture shows its edge. Disciplined under ambiguity. Units trained not just to fight, but to operate when information is incomplete, and guidance is deliberately minimal. This is something many militaries struggle with. They are built to follow clear chains of command. When those chains are disrupted, paralysis sets in. U.S. forces exploit that paralysis, not with speed alone, but with precision. Every movement is timed against the opponent's decision cycle. Not faster in absolute terms, but faster relative to their ability to understand what is happening. Once the target is physically isolated, the operation effectively ends. There is no victory parade, no occupation. The system around him, already brittle, absorbs the shock and then freezes. No one wants to be the first to escalate against a force that has demonstrated total control without mass violence. This is the part that often makes American power uncomfortable to watch. It does not announce itself as conquest. It presents itself as inevitability. What matters at the end of any high-risk operation is not the headline, but the condition of the force, the clarity of command, and the message sent without ever having to say it out loud. In a realistic modern operational scenario centered on a foreign military intervention aimed at detaining a head of state, the decisive phase is not the entry or the capture window itself, but the controlled exit and stabilization that follows. This is where the United States military, when operating at full institutional discipline, separates spectacle from substance. No fireworks, no unnecessary escalation. Just a clean handoff from kinetic readiness to strategic containment, executed with the same precision that brought the force in. By the time the detention objective is secured, the operational focus shifts immediately to airspace dominance, maritime control, and information containment. This is not about politics. This is about preventing chaos. U.S. forces would prioritize sealing the operational bubble for a defined time window, long enough to ensure that no irregular units, loyalist militias, or external actors can exploit confusion. Carrier-based air patrols would remain overhead, not as a threat, but as a visible reminder that any miscalculation will be short-lived. Amphibious assets would hold position offshore not to land troops, but to anchor the perception of overwhelming optionality. The message is simple and brutally clear. Escalation is a choice, and it would be a losing one. On the ground, U.S. involvement would remain deliberately limited. There is no appetite for occupation, no need for symbolic flag-raising. Instead, liaison elements and intelligence teams would focus on one thing, only maintaining the integrity of the exit corridor and ensuring the detained individual is transferred without incident to a controlled environment. Every movement is timed, every route pre-cleared, every contingency rehearsed. This is not improvisation. This is the result of decades of doctrine built around the idea that speed and restraint, when combined, create strategic shock without strategic collapse. From a military standpoint, the most impressive aspect of such an operation is not the tactical skill, but the discipline to stop. American power is often misunderstood as loud and impulsive. In reality, its most dangerous feature is its ability to disengage on its own terms. Once the objective is achieved, forces begin a phased drawdown almost immediately. Aircraft rotate out. Surface combatants adjust posture. The footprint shrinks before adversaries even finish arguing about what just happened. This is intentional. The longer a force lingers, the more oxygen it gives to resistance narratives. Titan Navy doctrine favors decisive action, followed by controlled absence. Information management is the silent battlefield in this phase. There is no need for dramatic briefings or chest-thumping statements. Official language remains dry, legalistic, almost boring. That boredom is a weapon. It denies opponents the emotional fuel they crave. Meanwhile, allies receive quiet reassurances through secure channels, emphasizing continuity, stability, and respect for international frameworks. Again, not ideology, but process. The United States military does not need applause. It needs predictability from its partners and caution from its rivals. Critics often imagine these scenarios as reckless or destabilizing. That assumption ignores the reality of modern U.S. force planning. The entire point of such an operation would be to avoid a wider conflict. Every deployment decision, every rules of engagement clause, every logistics calculation is designed to cap the event, not expand it. This is power used like a scalpel, not a hammer. And yes, there is a certain irony in watching opponents accuse Washington of aggression while simultaneously choosing not to test the perimeter. They understand the math, even if they reject the politics. From a strategic perspective, the long-term effect is less about the individual detained and more about restored deterrence. Military professionals know that credibility is not built on speeches, but on execution. When a force demonstrates it can plan, deploy, act, and withdraw with minimal friction, it reinforces a truth that has underpinned American naval and joint doctrine for decades. The United States does not need to be everywhere all the time. It only needs to be unstoppable when it decides to move. Titan Navy's view is blunt. This kind of operation handled correctly is not a flex. It is maintenance. Maintenance of global access. Maintenance of alliance confidence. Maintenance of a rules-based order that depends inconveniently for some on hard power sitting quietly behind soft words. No drama. No victory parades. Just a recalibrated balance achieved through logistics command discipline and the unglamorous excellence of professional soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines doing exactly what they trained to do. And when the carriers turn away, the skies quiet down and the maps update, the most important detail remains unchanged. The United States military leaves behind no mystery about capability, only a lingering question for everyone else. Was it worth testing it in the first place?